"You're not family, Raymond. You're just the checkbook we tolerate." That's what my daughter-in-law said to me at Christmas dinner, in front of everyone, with a smile on her face like she'd just said something clever. My son sat next to her and said nothing. I set down my fork, folded my napkin, and replied with 7 words. "Then you won't need my checks anymore." I drove home. My phone started ringing before I reached the highway. By midnight, I had 63 missed calls. And then something happened that changed everything I thought I knew about family, money, and what I actually owed the people who shared my last name. The message that started it all arrived on December 23rd, a Tuesday, at 4:18 inches the afternoon. I was in my home office in Nashville reviewing specifications for a consulting project, the kind of work I still took on occasionally to keep my mind sharp 3 years into retirement. My son Nathan had texted the family group chat asking what time I planned to arrive for Christmas dinner the following evening. A simple enough question. I replied that I'd be there by 6. Then my daughter-in-law Melissa responded, and the whole thread shifted. "Actually, Raymond, we're doing immediate family this year. Just us and the kids, you'd understand." I read it twice. Then a third time. Just us and the kids. Nathan's name was right there in the chat. He'd seen it arrive the same moment I did. The typing indicator appeared under his name, blinked for several seconds, then disappeared. He never sent anything. I called him directly. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I sat in my office chair for a long moment, looking out the window at the backyard where the November oak leaves had collected against the fence line. I thought about the check I'd written 11 days earlier. Mortgage payment, $2,400. Same as every month for 4 years. I thought about the car payment I'd set up on autopay for Nathan's truck, $587 monthly. I thought about Melissa's SUV lease, $448. Private school tuition for Sophie and Tyler, the 2 grandchildren I apparently wasn't immediate enough family to spend Christmas with, $3,100 quarterly, which I paid monthly, in installments of just over $1,000. I thought about the utilities I'd been covering because Nathan said they were struggling while he finished his master's degree, a degree he'd been finishing for going on 3 years now. I thought about the grocery cart I'd loaded every 2 weeks with $250 because Melissa said it helped reduce stress. I pulled up my banking app, the recurring payments section loaded with the patient indifference of software that didn't care about the weight of what it was showing me. The total sat at $6,240 every month. My retirement savings funded an entire lifestyle for people who apparently tolerated me for access to it. I was 63 years old. I had spent 38 years as a civil engineer, had built bridges and drainage systems and water treatment infrastructure across 4 states. I had raised Nathan largely alone after his mother Carol passed from ovarian cancer when he was 17. I had worked double the hours in the years following her death, because grief without motion was something I couldn't survive. And because I wanted Nathan to have the kind of stability that losing a parent at 17 could otherwise destroy. I had paid for his college in full, his apartment through graduate school, his wedding to Melissa 6 years ago, which cost me $42,000 at a venue Melissa had chosen, and Nathan had agreed to with the easy compliance of someone who understood that Dad would handle it. I hadn't handled it resentfully. That's the part I needed to sit with. I had written every check willingly, transferred every payment without requiring acknowledgement, because that's what I understood love to look like. You provide, you support, you remove obstacles. What I hadn't understood, what I was understanding now in this office chair with the oak leaves pressed against my fence, was that I had never once required anything in return. Not gratitude, not respect, not a seat at Christmas dinner. I opened the family chat one more time. Melissa's message still sat there. Nathan's silence still sat there beside it. I typed my reply slowly, making sure each word was exactly what I meant. Understood. I'll cancel the automatic payments this evening. Merry Christmas. I hit send. Watched the read receipts turn blue almost immediately. Both of them. Put the phone face down on my desk, opened my banking app on my laptop for better visibility, and started working through the list. The mortgage payment took 4 minutes to cancel. Confirmation number saved to a folder I created and labeled December 2024. Nathan's truck, another 4 minutes. Melissa's SUV lease required logging into a separate portal, Another 6 minutes. Private school tuition, logged into the school's payment system, located the recurring withdrawal, canceled it, received the confirmation email, forwarded it to the same folder. Utilities. Grocery card. The streaming bundle I'd been paying for, because Melissa said it was educational for the kids. Each one took between 3 and 8 minutes. I worked through them methodically, the same way I'd approached every engineering problem in my career. Thorough. Documented. Irreversible. By the time I finished, my phone had been ringing for 20 minutes. I hadn't touched it. I closed the laptop, stood up, stretched my back the way it needed stretching after I'd been sitting too long, and finally picked up the phone. 63 missed calls, 41 texts. The most recent text from Nathan read, "Dad, please answer. She didn't mean it like that. Please." I thought about Carol, about what she would say if she could see this moment. She had worried about Nathan even before she got sick, worried that I overcompensated for her illness by giving him too much without requiring enough. She'd said it once, gently, from her hospital bed, "Ray, he needs to learn that love isn't just receiving." I'd dismissed it at the time as the anxiety of a woman trying to prepare her family for her absence. I understood it now, 9 years too late. I powered down my phone's ringer, set it on the nightstand, and made myself dinner. Christmas morning, I drove to the cemetery on the east side of Nashville where Carol had been buried 9 years ago. I brought a small poinsettia from the grocery store because she'd always kept one on the kitchen counter in December. I sat on the bench near her headstone for about 45 minutes in the cold gray morning and talked through what had happened the way I used to talk through engineering problems with her at the kitchen table. She had been an accountant. Numbers made sense to both of us. The math of this situation was very clear. I told her about the total. Over $6,000 a month for 4 years came to nearly $300,000 in support, provided to a household that couldn't find space for me at the dinner table. I told her about Nathan's silence in the chat. I told her about Melissa's smile when she said it, the casual cruelty of someone who had never once considered that the source of her comfort had feelings worth managing. Carol would have said something sharp and accurate. She would have used a term from accounting, something about liabilities and returns. I sat in the cold and missed her with an acuity I hadn't felt in years. Back at my house, I made coffee, opened my laptop, and began the second phase of what I was already thinking of as a project rather than a crisis. Projects had steps and timelines and documented outcomes. I worked better when I framed things as projects. I opened the folder containing every payment confirmation I'd saved over 4 years. I had been meticulous, an engineering habit that had nothing to do with anticipating this moment and everything to do with how my brain organized information. I had 1,216 individual documents. Payment confirmations, bank statements, the email thread where Nathan had first asked if I could help with the mortgage just temporarily while things stabilized, Melissa's message last February asking me to add her to the grocery card because we're trying to teach the kids good shopping habits. All of it dated, time-stamped, intact. I wasn't sure yet what I'd need it for. I just knew that documentation was the foundation of everything defensible. Nathan appeared at my front door that afternoon. I watched him on the doorbell camera before I answered. He stood on the porch in the cold, hands in his jacket pockets, head down, alone, which surprised me. I'd expected Melissa's artillery backing him up. I opened the door. He looked up and I could see he hadn't slept, the particular hollowness around his eyes that he'd inherited from me. "Dad." His voice broke on the single syllable. I should have said something in the chat. I saw her type it, and He stopped. I stepped aside and let him in. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd talked through problems with Carol, and I poured coffee because it gave my hands something to do, and because the ritual of it bought me a moment to decide what kind of conversation this was going to be. "She wasn't wrong," I said finally. He looked up. "I have been functioning as a checkbook. I allowed that to happen. I kept writing checks and telling myself it was love, and it was, but I did it without ever requiring the most basic thing." "What's that?" "That you treat me like I matter. Not because of what I provide, just because I'm your father." He was quiet for a long time. Then, I know, Dad. I need you to understand that this isn't anger. I'm not doing this to punish you. I canceled those payments because I finally understood what continuing them was communicating, that I'll accept any treatment as long as I get to stay adjacent to your lives. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, a gesture so familiar from his childhood that it temporarily dissolved my composure. I breathed through it. She's furious, he said quietly. She thinks you're trying to destroy us. What do you think? He was quiet again, longer this time. I think you're doing what you should have done a long time ago. He said it like it cost him something, and I'm terrified of what it means for us, for Melissa and me, because everything she expects, the school, the house, the cars, none of it works without, he stopped himself. Without me. He nodded. I looked at my son, 31 years old, still my boy, still Carol's boy, sitting in the kitchen where he'd done his homework and complained about teachers and once cried for an hour because he didn't make varsity soccer. The same boy who had called me from college when he got his first C and said, "Dad, I don't know how to tell Mom." I had said, "You don't have to anymore, son. She already knows." We had both been wrecked by that for a few days. "I love you," I said. "That's not changing, but the checkbook is closed. What you build from here is yours to build." He left an hour later. I watched the camera as he sat in his car in my driveway for nearly 10 minutes before backing out. 2 days after Christmas, I called my attorney. I had used David Park for estate planning twice in the past decade and trusted his judgment. I laid out the situation clinically. 4 years of financial support totaling approximately $290,000. No written agreements. All payments documented through bank records. A family situation that had deteriorated and was likely to deteriorate further. I asked him what I needed to know. He asked me 2 questions. Did I own any property they were currently using? No, they owned their house. I had been paying the mortgage on a property deeded to Nathan. Did I have any co-signed loan obligations? The truck lease was in my name with Nathan as authorized driver. Melissa's SUV was the same structure. He told me I could terminate both leases as primary leaseholder, that I'd need to give the leasing companies formal notice, and that the vehicles would be retrieved or returned within a specified window, and that I should expect resistance, but had clear legal standing. He also said something I hadn't considered. He said, "Raymond, if any of this support was given with an expectation of repayment, even informally, you may have grounds to pursue recovery of funds. But I'd only recommend that path if you're prepared for significant conflict, and if the amount justifies the cost." I told him the amount. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he'd like to review my documentation. I sent him the folder that afternoon, all 1,216 files. He called me back the next morning and said, "You kept better records than most businesses I work with." New Year's came quietly. I made dinner, watched a documentary about the construction of the Golden Gate Bridge, went to bed at a reasonable hour. My phone had stopped ringing with the frantic frequency of the first few days. Nathan texted occasionally. Short messages. "Hope you're okay, Dad. Thinking about you." Nothing from Melissa, which was either restraint or strategy. I suspected strategy. January 8th, a Wednesday, my college friend Glenn Hartley called. We had known each other since freshman year at the University of Tennessee, had both gone into engineering, had drifted geographically but stayed in contact through the lazy but durable means of semi-annual phone calls and the occasional fishing trip. He was 64, retired from structural engineering in Charlotte, and had the specific wisdom of someone who'd watched his own family navigate complicated money situations. "Heard through the grapevine you had an interesting Christmas," he said. I told him everything. Glenn was the kind of listener who didn't interrupt, but also didn't let silence linger long enough to become avoidant. When I finished, he was quiet for exactly long enough to indicate he was thinking rather than waiting his turn. "You doing okay, Ray?" "I'm better than I expected to be." "You remember what you told me when Linda's mother moved in with us and expected us to fund her lifestyle indefinitely?" "What did I say?" "You said, 'Glenn, the kindest thing you can do for a person who's never had to be accountable is introduce them to accountability.'" I didn't remember saying that, but it sounded like something I might have said. How'd that turn out? She moved back to Raleigh after 3 months and learned to manage her own budget. Linda was furious with me for a year. Now she says it was the best thing I ever did. He paused. The people you love are always going to be angry when you stop carrying them, right up until the moment they realize they can walk. We talked for another hour about things unrelated to any of this. Bridge designs, the fishing trip we'd been postponing for 2 years, his younger daughter's new job in Seattle, the comfortable range of a friendship that didn't require crisis to justify itself. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table and felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't realized had been tightened for quite some time. The week of January 13th, David Park finalized the notice letters for both vehicle leases. Formal termination of primary leaseholder agreement, effective 14 days from receipt. I signed both. He sent them via certified mail on Thursday. On Friday morning, Nathan called. "Dad, they're taking the cars." His voice was controlled, but barely. Both of them. The letter says 2 weeks. Melissa she's losing her mind. "The leases are in my name, Nathan." I know they are. Sophie has school. Melissa takes her every morning. How is she supposed to? That's a problem I trust the two of you to solve. There was a long pause. I heard him exhale slowly. She's saying she's going to post about this online. Tell people what you're doing. She can do that. It'll be bad, Dad. She has a lot of followers she does these home organization videos. She's got like 40,000 people who... Nathan, I kept my voice even. Let her post whatever she wants. I have $300,000 worth of documentation and 1,200 files. I'm not worried about her followers. Another silence. Then, quietly, "Okay, are you okay?" A pause that lasted long enough to mean something. "I'm figuring it out." That was the right answer. I told him so before we hung up. The post went up on a Saturday. I only found out because my neighbor Janet, who was 61 and followed home improvement content online, texted me a screenshot with the message, "Raymond, is this about you?" The post was on Melissa's social media profile, which I didn't follow and hadn't visited in years. She had written a long caption beneath and by photo of Sophie and Tyler sitting on their couch, the children's expressions carefully arranged into something melancholic. The caption described a father-in-law who had abruptly cut off all support without warning, who was punishing innocent children for an argument about a dinner invitation, who had left a family scrambling to survive right after the holidays. It had been shared 212 times. I read it once, set my phone down, and went back to the consulting report I'd been reviewing. That evening I pulled up the original family chat screenshot. The one where Melissa had written that I wasn't immediate family and would understand being excluded. I texted it to 3 people. Glenn Hartley, my colleague Marcus Webb, who I'd worked with for 20 years and who knew Nathan from the company picnics he'd attended as a teenager, and David Park, because David had asked me to document everything Melissa did in response to the lease terminations. To Glenn and Marcus, I added a single line. This is what preceded all of it. Sharing in case anyone asks. Glenn responded within 5 minutes. Say no more. Marcus took 20 minutes. Then sent back a long paragraph that ended with, I've known you for 2 decades. Raymond and I have never once seen you do anything that wasn't fair. I didn't post anything publicly. Didn't respond to Melissa's narrative on any platform. I had learned enough about how these situations worked to understand that the best rebuttal to a false story is the documented truth, shared quietly with the people whose opinion actually mattered, and patience, while the false story exhausted itself. By Tuesday, 3 people from Nathan and Melissa's social circle had reached out to me directly. Not to condemn me, but to ask if I was all right. One of them, a woman named Diane, who had been in Melissa's wedding party, sent me a message that said only, I've been watching how she talks about you for years. I'm sorry it took this long for people to see it. The week the vehicles were retrieved, I drove past Nathan's house on a Tuesday morning. I wasn't going there deliberately. I had a consulting meeting 2 miles away, and the route happened to pass their street. I slowed as I went by. The driveway was empty, both cars gone. Through the front window, I could see the blue light of a television. The house looked ordinary, not destroyed, not in ruins. Just a house where people were figuring out how to live without things they'd been handed. I drove to my meeting. The hardest part came on February 3rd. I was at my desk when my phone chimed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. The message was a photo. Sophie and Tyler, sitting on what looked like Nathan's couch, both in pajamas. Sophie had her arm around Tyler. The caption Melissa had typed beneath it read, "They keep asking where Grandpa is. They don't understand why you abandoned them." I put the phone face down. I sat with that for a long time. The particular pain of seeing those two faces, knowing they were being positioned in front of a camera and told to look sad, knowing that Melissa understood exactly which nerve she was touching because she had watched me interact with Sophie and Tyler for 6 years and knew precisely how much I loved them. Sophie was 9. She had her mother's determination and Carol's eyes, which had startled me the first time I noticed it when Sophie was about 2 years old. Tyler was 7, quiet and methodical, in the way that I recognized as an inheritance from my side of the family. I had read to both of them, had attended the school plays that Sophie performed in and the science fair where Tyler's volcano had malfunctioned in a way that sent papier-mâché across the gymnasium floor and made him cry until I convinced him it was the most memorable volcano in the history of the fair. I had not abandoned them. I had been excluded from Christmas dinner while funding the house they lived in, and when I stopped funding it, I had been reframed as the one doing the abandoning. I picked up the phone, looked at the photo again. Melissa had not thought through what she was revealing by sending it. A mother who uses her children's faces as manipulation tools is demonstrating something important about the household those children are being raised in. I saved the screenshot to the documentation folder, added the unfamiliar phone number to my blocked contacts list, added a note to the file. That same week, I called David Park about something I'd been thinking about for 3 weeks. I wanted to establish a separate education trust for Sophie and Tyler, not through Nathan and Melissa, directly through a trust document, with me as grantor and a third-party institution as trustee, distributing funds only for verified educational expenses when the children reached college age. David said it was straightforward to structure. He asked how much I wanted to fund it. I told him $50,000 to start, with the option to add annually. He said he'd have the documents ready within 2 weeks. I told him one more thing. I asked him to ensure the trust was structured, so that Nathan and Melissa had no access to the funds and could not redirect them for any other purpose. That the money would exist for Sophie and Tyler specifically, accessible to them at 18 for education, invisible to everyone else until then. He said, that's exactly how I'd structure it anyway. The trust was funded on February 18th. I told no one. March brought something I hadn't anticipated. Nathan called on a Wednesday evening and asked if he could come over alone, not to argue, just to talk. I said yes. He arrived with a 6-pack of the craft beer we used to drink together when he was in his mid-20s, and I was still working long hours, and our relationship existed mostly in the territory of Sunday dinners and occasional ball games. We sat in the living room, the television off, the kind of quiet that requires some comfort to tolerate. She and I are not doing well, he said. He turned the beer bottle in his hands. I think we haven't been doing well for longer than I admitted. I waited. I keep thinking about what you said, about writing checks and calling it love. He looked up. I did that too. I let her manage everything because it was easier. I let her handle the money and the social stuff and the way she talked to you, because disagreeing with her was exhausting, and agreeing was... He stopped. I was a coward. Dad, you were conflict avoidant. There's a difference. Is there? One is a character flaw you can work on. The other is a moral failure you have to account for. I paused. I think you're working on it. He was quiet for a moment. She told the kids that you chose to leave. Not that any of this happened, just that you chose to leave. His jaw tightened. I corrected that. I sat them down and told them that wasn't true, that it was complicated, that Grandpa loves them and nothing about this was their fault. I felt something ease in my chest. Thank you for that. Sophie asked when she could see you. Tyler asked if you were sick. He exhaled. They're good kids, Dad. They didn't ask for any of this. We talked for 3 hours. Not about Melissa or money or what came next in any legal sense, just about Nathan, about the version of him that had existed before he'd learned that life's complications could be dissolved with a phone call to his father. He talked about his job, which he'd always been decent at but never committed to, about the degree he'd been deferring, completing, about an idea he'd had for a small engineering consulting business of his own that he'd dismissed because Melissa said the startup risk was irresponsible. He said it the way you say something out loud that you've been thinking quietly for years, testing whether the words held up outside your own head. They held up. I told him so. When he left, he stood at the door for a moment and said, "I'm sorry, Dad, for all of it. Not because I need something from you, just because it's true." I told him I heard him. I meant it. The end of March, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. A woman's voice, composed but with an edge of managed distress underneath it. She introduced herself as Karen, Melissa's mother, calling from Phoenix. She said she wanted me to know that she hadn't been aware of the full situation and that when she had learned the details, she had not been proud of her daughter. I didn't say much. Let her talk. She said Melissa had told her that I'd cut off all support without cause, that she'd been blindsided. Karen said she'd asked to see the family chat. Melissa had refused. She said that refusal told her everything she needed to know. "I raised her to have manners," Karen said quietly. "I don't know where this sense of entitlement came from. I'm embarrassed by it." I told her she didn't need to apologize for her daughter's choices. She said she wasn't calling to apologize as much as to make sure I understood that not everyone in Melissa's family thought what she'd done was acceptable. We talked for 20 minutes. By the end of it, I had a clearer picture of who Melissa had always been and how Nathan had been drawn into that orbit. Karen was a direct woman who didn't dress things up. Before we hung up, she said, "Sophie and Tyler deserve better than what's happening to them. I hope this finds a better shape." I told her I hoped the same thing. April. The mortgage on Nathan's house had now been missed for 4 months. I knew from David that Nathan had contacted the bank and been working with them on a modification, that he'd picked up additional project work, that he was managing. Not comfortably, but managing. The private school tuition had lapsed after January. Sophie and Tyler had been enrolled in the public elementary school 3 miles from their house. Nathan had texted me about it, matter-of-factly, as though reporting a project milestone. Kids are adjusting well. Sophie made a friend already. Tyler likes his teacher. I had texted back, "Good. They're resilient." He'd replied, "They get it from their grandfather." I'd sat with that for a moment before putting the phone away. The police call came on April 22nd. A Detective Harmon from Metro Nashville called and identified himself politely. He said a complaint had been filed alleging financial elder abuse. My name as the alleged victim, my son's household as the source of the complaint. He read me the specific allegation, that I had been coerced into making large financial transfers through psychological manipulation and was being financially exploited. I kept my voice steady. I told Detective Harmon I had retained legal counsel and would have my attorney contact him with documentation. I ended the call and immediately called David Park. David was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She filed a complaint claiming you were the victim to make you the subject of an investigation. It's designed to create a paper trail that makes you look like either a confused elderly man or someone under scrutiny." What do? We send him everything. Every payment confirmation, every bank record, every communication. We demonstrate that all transfers were made willingly, competently, and with full documentation by a 63-year-old licensed professional engineer with no cognitive impairment. This collapses within a week. It collapsed in 6 days. Detective Harmon called back, apologized for the inconvenience, confirmed the complaint had been closed as unfounded. He was professional and gave nothing away, but the call was brief enough that I understood the documentation had been straightforwardly decisive. David called me an hour later. She didn't understand what she was doing. Filing a false complaint creates a record of her own bad faith that is now part of the official documentation. If she tries anything further, this makes her look worse, not better. I asked him about what happened next. He said the natural momentum of consequences was doing its work without me having to push anything. He recommended I focus on my own life and let the situation find its level. I took that advice seriously. May arrived warm and genuinely pleasant. Nashville in early spring was one of the reasons I had stayed here after Carol died, when I could have moved anywhere. I had taken on a larger consulting project for a county infrastructure review, something that required genuine engagement and got me out of the house 3 days a week. I had lunch with Glenn when he drove up from Charlotte for a long weekend. We went to a restaurant near the river and talked for 3 hours and only spent about 20 minutes of it on the family situation. He asked how I was sleeping. I told him better than I had in years. When did you stop sleeping well? He asked. I thought about it. Sometime in the second year of the payments, when I started waking up at 3 in the morning, running calculations in my head. He nodded slowly. Bodies know before minds do. The call from Nathan that I hadn't anticipated came on a Thursday evening in June. He asked if he could bring the kids over on Saturday. He said it carefully, not as a bargaining tool or a manipulation, just as a question with genuine uncertainty about the answer. I said yes. They arrived at 10 in the morning. Nathan hung back at the door while Sophie came in first, moving with the particular combination of restraint and barely suppressed energy that told me she'd been coached to be on her best behavior and was working hard at it. Tyler followed, staying close to Nathan's elbow. Both of them looked at me with the careful assessment of children who have been told that a relationship requires rebuilding and are approaching that task with the literal mindedness of people who don't yet understand that some things rebuild themselves if you leave them room. I had bought a board game the week before, space-themed, cooperative, age-appropriate. I set it up on the coffee table, and within 45 minutes we were all on the floor, and the carefulness was mostly gone, replaced by the normal texture of children negotiating rules and adults pretending to lose track of whose turn it was. At one point, Sophie looked up from the game board and said, "Daddy said you didn't leave because you don't love us." "That's right," I said. "He said it was complicated grown-up stuff." "That's also right." She considered this with the focused seriousness of a 9-year-old processing information she found insufficient. "Okay," she said finally, and moved her piece. Tyler waited until Sophie was occupied with her next turn, and then said very quietly, as though sharing a confidence, "I'm glad you're not sick." I looked at my grandson. "Me too, buddy." When they left that afternoon, Sophie hugged me at the door. Tyler waved from behind Nathan's leg, and then, at the last second, reached out and grabbed my hand for a moment before letting go. Nathan and I stood on the porch while the kids went to his car, a used sedan I'd noticed in the driveway, modest and practical, the kind of car you buy when you're managing your own budget for the first time. "Thank you," he said. "It was good to see them." He nodded. He started to say something else, stopped, then said, "Melissa filed for divorce. Last month." He said it matter-of-factly, not for sympathy, just as information. I think it was happening regardless. The money stuff accelerated it. "Are you okay?" Yeah, I think so." He looked out at the kids in the car. "I'm figuring out what I actually want, what I actually am without someone else managing everything." He paused. "It's uncomfortable, but it feels real." That was the most adult thing I'd heard Nathan say in years. I told him so. He looked slightly embarrassed and slightly grateful, the particular combination that meant the observation had landed accurately. July brought the confirmation that the trust was fully funded and properly structured, with a third-party institution named as trustee. $52,000. Invisible, safe, and entirely untouchable by anyone except Sophie and Tyler themselves when they reached the age and the academic need that would unlock it. I had told David to include a provision allowing distributions for documented trade school enrollment as well, because I'd spent my career around skilled tradespeople and believed in the value of the work they did. I had told no one about the trust except David Park and Glenn Hartley. I would tell Sophie and Tyler eventually, when they were old enough to understand it. Not as a revelation or a dramatic gesture, just as information. Your grandfather set this aside for you. This is what it is. Use it well. August arrived and the consulting project concluded. I submitted the final report to the county, received their formal acknowledgement, and took a week to go fishing at the lake house Glenn rented every year in eastern Tennessee. We caught nothing significant on the first day, which was traditional and expected, and gradually more on each subsequent day, which was satisfying. On the fourth evening, sitting on the dock with the sunset doing something genuinely beautiful over the water, Glenn said, "How do you feel about everything? Honestly." I thought about it, like I set down something very heavy that I'd been carrying so long I'd stopped noticing the weight. Regret? About pulling the support? No. I paused. About waiting so long to do it? Yes. The kids? I see them regularly now. Through Nathan. separately from whatever Melissa is doing, which is apparently less and less, given that she's moved back to Phoenix. I looked at the water. They're good. They're okay. Kids adapt when the adults stop making them into instruments. And Nathan? Nathan is becoming someone I respect. I said it carefully, because it was true, but also because it was the kind of thing that was still fragile, still in process. He's uncomfortable, and he's working, and he's making decisions like an adult who understands that decisions have consequences. It took all of this for that to happen. I don't know how to feel about that except that it happened. Glenn nodded slowly. We were quiet for a while, watching the light change on the water. Carol would be proud of you, he said. She'd say I took too long. She'd say both things, he said. That's what she was like. I didn't answer, but I smiled, which was its own kind of answer. I came home from the lake house on a Sunday evening in late August. The city was still warm, the kind of warmth that built all summer and didn't release until October. I made dinner, opened the windows, listened to the neighborhood settle into its evening rhythms. Someone was mowing a lawn 2 houses down. A dog barked in the distance, and then was quiet. My phone showed a text from Nathan. A photo of Sophie and Tyler at what looked like their school's back-to-school night. Both of them standing next to their classroom doors, backpacks on, the particular expression of children who have been asked to smile and are doing their best. The caption Nathan had written said simply, "They started the year well. Thank you for being here." I looked at the photo for a moment, set the phone down, looked out the window at the last of the daylight above the roofline. 8 months. 8 months since Christmas dinner and the 7 words I'd said when I set down my fork. 8 months since the phone rang 63 times while I drove home in the dark. 8 months of documentation and attorney calls, and certified mail and a social media post I never responded to, and a false police complaint that collapsed under its own dishonesty, and a photo of 2 children designed to break what they thought was left of my resolve. 8 months of learning, again what I'd always known in my work, that structures built without proper load calculations eventually fail regardless of how long they've stood, and that the only honest response to a failing structure is to assess it accurately, document the damage, and build something sound in its place. The trust existed, invisible and patient. The documentation existed, thorough and irrefutable. The consulting work existed, purposeful and mine. The relationship with my son was rebuilding itself at the pace that genuine things rebuild, slowly, unevenly, with setbacks that needed to be treated as information rather than verdicts. The relationship with my grandchildren was simpler, because children are simpler. They needed presence and consistency, and a grandfather who showed up without conditions, that I could provide. I was already providing it. I turned away from the window. The apartment was quiet, organized, exactly the size I needed. I made tea, turned on the radio to a station that played older jazz Carol had liked, sat at the kitchen table with the consulting invoice I needed to review before the morning. The work was clear. The numbers were clean. The future was mine to fund appropriately, without confusing obligation for love or money for meaning, or the silence of the people who took from me for the acceptance I'd been trying to buy. I opened the invoice, picked up my pen. Outside, the last of the summer evening settled into Nashville like it belonged there. I supposed it did, and so did I.